Hello, this is Dr. Lyle. We're going to welcome to the Critical Science Podcast. Yay. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about benzoyl peroxide. It's been in the news lately. Benzoyl peroxide, as some of you may know, is a drug that's used to help people who have acne. So it helps clear up your acne. It treats it. It's not the only product available to do that, but for some people it's very safe and it's very effective. So why exactly am I talking about benzoyl peroxide today? Well, as it turns out, there's a company called Valashur. Valashur has a history of testing different products, trying to find impurities, and then they'll go forward to the Food and Drug Administration, for instance, and then they will say, "Hey, we found this in there, and this isn't really cool." And then the FDA will send notices out to industry to say, "Hey, can you guys look at this and see if this is real or not?" So what happened recently is Valashur has looked at some benzoyl peroxide products, some name brands, some generics, and what they found is that there is benzene, but only when they do something crazy, like test it after being exposed to heat for a very, 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 very long time. I mean, when I'm talking heat, I'm not talking like, sitting here in my office or in your medicine cabinet. I'm talking about really high heat. So in one case, it was 37 degrees centigrade. 37 degrees centigrade is about body temperature. In other cases, it was much higher, like 70 degrees centigrade. And, I'm just going to look this up real quick. I don't remember my centigrade that well. So 70 degrees centigrade is 158 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot. That's really hot. So let me repeat this again. Valashur, what they did was they allowed the products to sit out in the heat, which is not how you're supposed to store these products, right? And they let it set out for a very long time. So if I go to the paper here from environmental health perspectives, in some cases they were letting it incubate, so sit out in the heat for as much as 30 days. At 37 degrees, maybe a little over 20 days, or 21 days is what it says here, at 50 degrees Celsius. And then there's another plot where it's 70 degrees Celsius, or 160 degrees, 158 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was there for about 16, 17 hours. So these aren't temperatures that you would normally store your acne products at. And one of the things that caught my attention when I was reading their paper, I didn't look at the petition. I went straight to the paper and environmental health perspectives. There's a statement here that caught my attention. I'm looking over at the paper just to make sure that I quote them accurately. And they say there is no safe level of benzene exposure to humans. Okay, let's stop there. Let's think about this. No safe level of benzene exposure. When you hear somebody tell you that there's no safe level of exposure to something, you're not dealing with a credible toxicologist. You are dealing with somebody who is probably closer to an activist. And that's one of my concerns here, is that we may be dealing with an activist group here, because they're saying there is no safe level of benzene for humans, blah. And so think about that. What they're saying, just think about this. What they're saying is one molecule of benzene is unsafe for humans. Is that true? No, of course it's not true. One molecule of benzene will do nothing biologically that is remotely significant. It's not even your body. It won't even be on the radar for your body. There are so many other things competing for attention with your body. If you think of chemicals as like children, okay, if you have 15 million children that you're trying to manage, which, God, that'd be awful. Oof. But just imagine you have all these children that you're trying to manage, and then just this one, comes along. That one gets lost in the noise. And that's what happens biologically. One molecule of benzene is not toxic. Let me say that again. One molecule of benzene is not toxic. Okay, there even when we're dealing with cancer, we still have thresholds, and so we still have these thresholds that you have to reach before you're actually going to see some kind of toxicity, and that includes cancer. So saying one molecule is toxic or unsafe is just hogwash. And that's how you know you're not actually dealing with a credible toxicologist. You're not dealing with someone who is, knowledgeable about toxicology. You're dealing with someone who um, doesn't know this field, doesn't know the science. And unfortunately, they're using advocacy talking points. And that's a bit of a problem. And so, what I want you to know is, you know, are benzoyl peroxide products safe? I'm going to venture a guess that yes, because people have been using these for a long time. I remember in the 80s seeing commercials for benzoyl peroxide acne products, right? I remember seeing them constantly on television, especially if you were watching Fox and, all those great primetime shows on Fox during the week. There are all kinds of benzoyl peroxide commercials at that time. So we have a long history of using benzoyl peroxide in this country, and there hasn't been issues with it. And now this company comes along and they say, "Oh my gosh, we're finding benzene." Now, Valashur is the same company that finds really low levels of impurities in different products. And what's interesting is as our ability to detect chemicals improves over time, and I've said this before in previous episodes, as our ability to detect chemicals improves over time, we're going to continue to find these impurities. Now, if you take the activist slant and you say that one molecule of benzene is harmful to humans, then of course you're going to start finding products harmful that have always been known to be safe. That's the problem. So we actually need to do a better job of educating the public about the fact that we're going to get better at detecting chemicals in products. We're going to get much better at detecting impurities in products. And in many cases, these impurities have been there the whole time. And so we have to start making these tough choices about, well, do we educate the public about the fact that there are thresholds? And do we start educating the public about the fact that you really do need to get above a certain threshold before you see toxicity? Or are we going to continue to allow people to live in ignorance and continue to believe these activist talking points? I personally want to be on the side of helping educate people about the science so that they can critically analyze and make their own decisions, right? I'm not telling you that you should go out and use benzoyl peroxide products if you don't need to. That's up to you. That's your own personal choice. Maybe you like the salicylic products more. It's great. I'm happy for you. All I'm saying is right now we have activist talking points telling us, oh my gosh, we found benzene in a product, and now we know that benzene is unsafe at any concentration, so therefore you shouldn't use this product. No, that's just complete and utter hogwash. Because, like I said, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it again, a single molecule of benzene is not going to do anything. Just like a single molecule of ozone is not going to do anything. Now you might be asking, well, why is that? Why is it that a single molecule of benzene is not actually going to be harmful to us? Why is that? Well, the biggest reason is because one of the hypotheses of how benzene is going to work is that it will cause either some kind of DNA damage, or maybe it's going to change how certain cells signal. The problem with that hypothesis is a couple things. Number one, if you believe that benzene is actually going to damage DNA, as some people do, we have a thing called DNA repair. Every human on the planet has DNA repair, with the exception of people with Xeroderma pigmentosa, which is an extremely rare disease where these people have some impairment in their DNA damage repair mechanism. It's a very tragic disease. It's a mutation that they have, unfortunately. And, typically these individuals realize that they have this condition at a pretty early age. because they will unfortunately develop cancer. And that's what happens when you can't repair your DNA, is you will eventually get cancer. And in these cases with Xeroderma pigmentosa, it's actually due to the sun's UV rays. That's actually what's going to give them the most cancer. And so you'll start seeing tumors on their tongue, you'll see tumors on their face, etc. Um, Interestingly, when some of these children, if they are fair skinned, and they start burning, their parents will put more sunscreen on them. That actually tends to allow them to um, live a longer time before they either develop cancer, or sometimes they will develop other brain neurological diseases instead, and they won't develop the cancer, and they'll die from those. It's a very tragic thing. It's very unfortunate. Um, but we know that we have DNA repair, and we know that our DNA repair mechanisms are working all the time. And so part of this trying to get over that threshold is you have to have enough DNA repair or enough DNA damage being caused by a chemical to overcome the body's natural ability to repair that DNA. For some of the other mechanisms, causing inappropriate signaling within cells, we have a process in biology called homeostasis, which is cells have a state that they like to be in, and they will do everything they can to return to that state. And there's all kinds of mechanisms that our cells have for doing this. But if a chemical is causing inappropriate signaling, eventually the cells will become desensitized to that level of signaling, and that is another mechanism to overcome it. So when we think about dose response curves, this is the way I like to think of it. At these really low doses over here, right? We got these really low doses. What's happening is the chemical isn't even tickling the biology. It's not. There's so much other noise in the system that at low doses the chemical is being ignored. Eventually, you're going to get up to a high enough dose where you're causing some kind of perturbation in the biology, so some kind of change in the biology. But what happens at this level is it's what we have adaptive mechanisms. So you're still not above the threshold for toxicity, because we have adaptive mechanisms that will then return the biology back to its normal state, back to homeostasis. Once you get above a threshold, though, now we're way up here. We're at a much higher dose. At this dose, now we're going to see toxicity. And what's happening is that we've overcome the cell's natural defense systems and natural adaptations. And we're at the point where now we're actually going to start killing cells, or we're going to start reprogramming them to do bad things for a very long period of time. But typically it's going to be some kind of cell death, to be honest with you. That's usually what starts ticking things off. And once you start having unprogrammed cell death, or what we call oncotic necrosis, which is really cool. Oncotic necrosis, the onco means that it's swelling. And so what happens is the cell starts to die. And because it's doing this in an uncontrolled manner, there becomes issues with the cell membrane, which is just this layer of fats. And what happens is that will start opening up and allowing water to rush in. And then the water actually causes the cell to explode. It's really kind of neat and fascinating, morbid kind of way. But anyway, so you will have this oncotic necrosis. Well, when the cell explodes, all the contents within the cell are actually going to go all over the place. And then these immune cells come along, and the immune cells are constantly in contact with our cells, and they start detecting, oh, crap, something happened. This cell died. And then that will activate the immune system to, number one, clean things up, but to number two, try to figure out why it died. And so then you'll start getting an inflammatory response. It's really cool. And then depending upon what's happening, like if it's in part of the liver, you might start having internal bleeding, and that could lead to fibrosis. And then if you have enough fibrosis, then you get into cirrhosis, which most of us probably learned in health class was due to excessive drinking. It can also be due to hepatitis and other things. But anyway, it's really cool. It's really fascinating. Long story short, in order to see those kinds of things, you kind of have to be at a higher dose. One molecule of benzene is not going to do anything. So the idea that there's no safe level of benzene exposure for humans, that's not true. And anytime you hear somebody tell you that there's no safe level of something, that's an activist talking point. That's not an actual toxicologist, and that's not science. So when you hear somebody say there is no safe level of lead, that is incorrect. That is not how a toxicologist would talk about it. And we'll talk about lead in another episode in the future. I'm putting that together right now. But just remember, when somebody says there is no safe level of something, that is not at all what the science says. Not at all. That is an activist talking point. And that should, tickle your spidey senses to start saying, yeah, maybe I should really take a very close, hard look at this. And, I'm not the only one who's complaining about this particular study and talking about the fact that, they're using temperatures that are completely unrealistic for this degradation study. Now, Valashur is going to defend this study by saying, well, this is called accelerated decomposition, and this is a common practice within our field. And that's true. Accelerated degradation is something that is common practice amongst Valashur and their friends. That's true. But that doesn't mean that it's relevant. And that's one of the things that you have to remember when you're starting to do the critical thinking about this is you have to say, okay, is this experiment using relevant conditions? And if it's not using relevant conditions, if they are actually doing accelerated degradation, again, that's not relevant. We have to really, really, really take it with a grain of salt. These accelerated degradation studies are important, and they're important because they help us identify what could happen in terms of degradation. That's important, okay? Don't get me wrong. That's important to know. But you can't use that to then extrapolate down to normal storage conditions. Now, you might be saying, now, wait a second. Don't the companies do degradation studies under normal storage conditions? And the answer is yes. Yes, they do. The companies need to do some kind of study to look at normal storage conditions. And they need to, and that's part of the current good manufacturing practices. That's something that they need to do. They need to know how is this going to degrade over time. And that's where you might start seeing them, if they print on your package used by such and such a date. Usually that means, it could mean many things. You don't know exactly why they're doing it. It could be because of a degradation issue. It could be because they can't guarantee that it's going to be very high quality after a certain date, or maybe it doesn't work as well after a certain date. So it's hard to tell what that actually means. But generally speaking, yes, the companies do perform degradation studies. They do have a pretty good idea as to what's going to be formed under normal conditions. Now, is the Valashur study going to cause FDA to be a little more vigilant and ask the companies to be more vigilant? That's my guess. My guess is more than likely FDA will look at this, and I could be wrong, but I think the FDA is going to look at this study and say, all right, industry, just go check your stuff on the shelves, go check your stuff as you're making it, measure your impurities, and then make sure to tell us whether or not the impurities are at safe levels if you have them. And actually, I got to be careful about calling them impurities. We'll talk about that another day. It might just be, not necessarily impurities, but things that are known to be in there due to how the product is formulated that aren't an issue. So I don't want to call them impurities because that actually has a different connotation. But rather, it has things that are known to be in there that are at levels that are safe. And so it could be, and I haven't read the benzoyl peroxide regs, so I'd need to look at those a little more closely before I say too much about that. But what I do want to say is that with respect to this study, again, this study was looking at unrealistic degradation conditions. These are unrealistic. You are not supposed to be storing your benzoyl peroxide at these constant or at these temperatures. That's just, you're not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be at room temperature. So follow the manufacturer's instructions, do what the manufacturer says. Your product is likely very safe. That's the bottom line. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, or even if you didn't enjoy this episode, like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. What else did I want to say about this? I think that's all I want to say about benzoyl peroxide. Anyway, again, the other take home message, if you forget anything else that I said today, other than the benzoyl peroxide products, this does not provide evidence that currently sold products on the shelves are dangerous. This study does not provide that kind of evidence. The other thing that I want you to remember is that we do have dose response. One single molecule of benzene is not toxic. But also remember this whole idea about, you have to get to a certain threshold. And when you're below that threshold, we're still in the range of adaptive responses. The body is going to heal itself, right? The body is going to counteract this chemical. The body is going to learn how to ignore it, right? So once you need to reach this toxic threshold, and at that toxic threshold, that's where we start to see adverse outcomes. So you need to be really, really high. And we're talking lots and lots and lots of molecules before you reach that range. Anyway, like I said, thank you very much for listening. This is the Critical Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Lyle Burgoon. Have a great day.